The dust kicked up behind Marcus Wellington's black Mercedes as he drove down the winding dirt road toward the Henderson Ranch. The GPS on his dashboard had stopped working 20 miles back, leaving him to navigate by the hand-drawn map old Pete Henderson had sketched on a napkin at the livestock auction 3 weeks ago. Marcus adjusted his expensive sunglasses and checked his Rolex. He was already 40 minutes late for what should have been a simple horse purchase. The Wellington name meant something in Texas. It meant oil wells and cattle empires, shopping centers, and political influence. Marcus had inherited more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes, but what he really wanted was to build the finest quarter-horse breeding operation in the state. That's what brought him to this remote corner of hill country, chasing rumors of a stallion that could change his entire program. The Henderson place appeared around a bend like something from another century. The main house was a simple white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, paint peeling in places but sturdy. A red barn stood behind it, and beyond that, white fenced pastures stretched toward rolling hills dotted with oak trees. It was the kind of place Marcus's grandfather might have started with, before oil made the Wellington family rich beyond measure. Marcus parked near the house and stepped out, his Italian leather boots immediately collecting dust. He wore a crisp white shirt and dark jeans that cost more than most people's monthly salary, but he'd learned long ago that showing up to horse deals in a three-piece suit was a mistake. Ranch folk respected money, but they respected horses more. The front porch was empty. Marcus knocked on the screen door and waited, listening to the sound of wind chimes and distant cattle lowing. No answer. He walked around the house, calling out, but got no response except for a dog barking somewhere in the distance. That left the barn. The stallion he'd come to see was supposed to be something special, a son of a famous cutting horse champion with bloodlines worth their weight in gold. Pete Henderson had been cagey about the price, which usually meant either the horse was worth a fortune or there was something wrong with it. Marcus had driven 6 hours to find out which. The barn doors stood partially open, and Marcus could smell hay and leather and horse. Good smells. Real smells that reminded him why he loved this business despite having enough money to never work again. He pushed the door wider and stepped inside. "Mr. Henderson?" His voice echoed in the dim space. Sunlight filtered through high windows, creating columns of golden light filled with floating dust motes. Horse stalls lined both sides of the center aisle, most of them empty. At the far end, Marcus could see a large stall that might hold the stallion he'd come to see. He walked down the aisle, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. The first few stalls were empty, cleaned and ready for horses that weren't there. In the fourth stall, a bay mare lifted her head and nickered softly. She had kind eyes and the conformation of a good broodmare. Marcus made a mental note to ask about her too. The fifth stall was different. As Marcus approached, he noticed fresh straw bedding and a water bucket, but instead of a horse, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A little girl sat curled up in the corner of the stall, her back against the wooden wall. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with tangled brown hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in days. Her face was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion or illness or both. What struck Marcus most was her silence. When he appeared at the stall door, she looked up at him with huge brown eyes but didn't speak, didn't cry out, didn't run. She just watched him with the wariness of a wounded animal. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, crouching down to make himself less intimidating. "I'm looking for Mr. Henderson. Is he around?" The girl didn't answer. She pulled her knees closer to her chest and continued staring at him. Marcus noticed she was shivering despite the warmth of the afternoon. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he asked, genuine concern replacing his earlier impatience about the horse deal. "Are you hurt?" Still no response. The girl's breathing seemed labored, and Marcus could see she was frighteningly thin. Her clothes hung on her small frame like she'd lost weight recently. Something was very wrong here. Marcus had never been particularly good with children. His wealth had insulated him from most of life's messier realities, and his social circle didn't include many families. But looking at this silent, pale child in the horse stall triggered something protective in him that he didn't fully understand. "I'm Marcus," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "What's your name?" The girl's lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. She touched her throat with one small hand, and Marcus wondered if she physically couldn't speak or if she was choosing not to. A sound from the far end of the barn made them both look up. Heavy footsteps on concrete, and then a man's voice calling out. "Hello, somebody in here." "Down here," Marcus called back, standing up but staying near the stall. "Are you Pete Henderson?" A man emerged from the shadows at the far end of the barn. He was in his 60s, wearing faded jeans and a work shirt with sweat stains under the arms. His face was weathered and lined with the deep tan of someone who spent his life outdoors, but his eyes looked tired, older than his years. "You must be Wellington," Pete said, extending a calloused hand. "Sorry I wasn't at the house, had to run into town for feed." "No problem," Marcus replied, shaking the offered hand. Then he nodded toward the stall. "But I think we might have a more immediate concern here." Pete's face changed when he saw where Marcus was looking. The weariness in his eyes deepened into something that looked like despair. "Emma," he said softly, and the girl's eyes moved to his face. "You shouldn't be out here, honey, it's too hot." Emma, at least now Marcus had a name to go with the haunting face. But Pete's reaction told him there was a story here, and probably not a happy one. "Is she your granddaughter?" Marcus asked. Pete nodded, his jaw tight. "My daughter's girl been staying with us since her mama passed last month." The weight of that simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child had lost her mother just a month ago, and from the looks of her, she wasn't handling it well. That explained the silence, the hollow look in her eyes, the way she seemed to have shrunk in on herself. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it. "That's a terrible loss." "Cancer," Pete said, the word coming out like gravel. "Took her quick once it got going. Emma hasn't spoken since the funeral. Doctor says it might be temporary, might not be. Sometimes grief does that to a child." Marcus looked back at Emma, who was watching their conversation with those enormous eyes. The protective feeling in his chest grew stronger. This wasn't just about a sick child anymore. This was about a little girl who had lost everything that mattered to her. "Where's her father?" Marcus asked quietly. Pete's expression darkened. "Never been in the picture. My Sarah, she was a good girl, but she made some poor choices when she was young. Emma's daddy took off before she was born, never looked back." So Emma was alone except for her grandfather. Marcus could see the love in Pete's eyes when he looked at the girl, but he could also see the helplessness. Pete Henderson was a horseman, not a child psychologist. He was doing his best, but his best might not be enough. "The doctor wants to put her on some kind of medicine," Pete continued, lowering his voice. "Says it might help with the trauma, help her start talking again, but insurance won't cover it, and I don't have that kind of money. Been trying to sell some horses to raise the cash, which is why I called you about Thunder." Thunder must be the stallion, but suddenly horses seemed like the least important thing in the world. Marcus looked at Emma again, nodding the way she struggled with each breath, the unhealthy pallor of her skin. This child needed medical attention, and she needed it soon. "How much?" Marcus asked. "What do you mean?" "The medicine, how much does it cost?" Pete's face flushed. "Now hold on, Mr. Wellington. I didn't tell you all this to ask for charity. I've got the horse, and if you want him, we can make a deal. That's all I'm asking for." Marcus admired the man's pride, but pride wouldn't save Emma. "Show me the horse," he said. "But first, let's get Emma out of this stall. She should be inside where it's cool." Pete nodded and approached the stall slowly. "Come on, honey," he said to Emma. "Let's go up to the house, maybe get you something to drink." Emma didn't move. She looked from her grandfather to Marcus and back again, but she remained curled up in the corner of the stall. It was as if she'd found this spot and decided it was safe, and she wasn't willing to leave it. "She's been doing this," Pete said, frustration and worry mixing in his voice. "Finds a corner somewhere and just sits. Sometimes it's under the kitchen table, sometimes it's behind the couch. Yesterday I found her sleeping in the hay loft." Marcus crouched down again, this time closer to the stall door. "Emma," he said softly, "it's pretty hot out here in the barn. Your grandfather's right about going inside where it's cooler." Emma's eyes met his, and for just a moment Marcus thought he saw something flicker there. Not trust exactly, but maybe curiosity. She was studying him the way horses studied strangers, trying to decide if he was a threat or not. "Tell you what," Marcus said, an idea forming. "Why don't we all go look at Thunder together? Then we can go inside and talk about getting you feeling better." The mention of feeling better made Emma's expression change. She touched her throat again, and Marcus saw tears gathering in her eyes. She was sick, scared, and grieving, and she was only 7 years old. "It's okay to be sad," Marcus said, surprised by his own words. He wasn't usually the type to offer comfort to children, but something about Emma brought out an unfamiliar gentleness in him. "It's okay to miss your mama, but hiding in horse stalls isn't going to make you feel better." Emma's lower lip trembled, and for a moment Marcus thought she might cry. Instead, she slowly uncurled herself and stood up. She was even smaller standing than she'd looked sitting down, a tiny figure in clothes that were too big for her. Pete opened the stall door and Emma walked out slowly, staying close to the wall. She moved like someone much older, careful and deliberate, as if every step took effort. "Thunder's down this way," Pete said, leading them toward the far end of the barn. "Fair warning, though, he's got some attitude." They walked down the aisle together, an unlikely trio. The millionaire in expensive clothes, the weather-beaten rancher, and the silent little girl who stayed between them like she was afraid one of them might disappear. The stallion's stall was larger than the others, with extra reinforcement on the walls. Marcus could hear the horse moving around inside before they reached the door, the sound of hooves on bedding and the occasional snort. Thunder was magnificent. Even standing still in his stall, the horse radiated power and intelligence. He was a deep bay with black points, standing probably 16 hands high with the muscled build of a cutting horse. His head was refined but strong, with eyes that missed nothing. When he saw the group approaching, he lifted his head and trumpeted a challenge that echoed through the barn. "He's beautiful," Marcus said, and meant it. This was the kind of horse that could anchor a breeding program, the kind of genetic gold mine that serious horsemen spent years searching for. "His sire was Peppy Sandbadger's grandson," Pete said with obvious pride. "His dam goes back to Doc Barr. He's got the bloodlines and the athletic ability, won his first futurity before he was 3. Marcus studied the horse with an expert eye. Thunder moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete, and his conformation was nearly perfect. This wasn't just a good horse, this was a great horse. "What happened?" Marcus asked. "Why isn't he still competing?" Pete's expression grew troubled. "Injury. Strained a tendon in his right front leg during a competition last year. Healed up fine, but his owner didn't want to risk it happening again. Decided to retire him to stud." That explained why Pete had been able to afford the horse. An injured champion was worth far less than a sound one, even if the injury had healed completely. But for breeding purposes, Thunder's value was in his genetics, not his soundness. Emma had moved closer to the stall, drawn by the magnificent horse despite her obvious physical discomfort. Thunder noticed her too, lowering his head to look at the small figure by the door. "He likes kids," Pete said softly. "Always been gentle with them, even with his attitude toward adults." As if to prove the point, Thunder nickered softly when Emma raised her hand toward his nose. The stallion stretched his neck over the stall door, allowing the little girl to touch his muzzle with her fingertips. For the first time since Marcus had found her in the stall, Emma's expression changed. Not quite a smile, but a softening around her eyes that made her look more like the child she was supposed to be. "He's beautiful," Marcus said again, but this time he wasn't just talking about the horse. He was watching Emma's face as she interacted with Thunder, seeing a flicker of life that hadn't been there before. "So," Pete said, clearly uncomfortable with the business side of things. "What do you think? I know he's got some miles on him, but his bloodlines are solid, and he's proven he can produce quality offspring." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying both the horse and the man who owned him. He could see the desperation Pete was trying to hide, the way his hands shook slightly when he talked about money. This wasn't just about selling a horse. This was about saving his granddaughter. "How much do you need?" Marcus asked quietly. "For Emma's medicine, I mean." Pete straightened, his pride flaring again. "I told you, Mr. Wellington, I'm not asking for charity. I've got a horse to sell, and if you're interested, we can negotiate a fair price." "I am interested," Marcus said. "Very interested, but I'm also interested in making sure Emma gets the help she needs." Emma was still standing by Thunder's stall, one small hand resting on the horse's nose. The stallion stood perfectly still, as if he understood that the child needed gentleness. "The medicine costs $8,000 a month," Pete said finally, the words coming out like they hurt to say. "Insurance says it's experimental, won't cover a dime. Doctor says she might need it for 6 months, maybe longer. $48,000 minimum. For most people, it might as well have been 48 million. For Marcus, it was pocket change. He spent more than that on a single piece of art for his office." And Thunder? Marcus asked. I was hoping to get 25,000 for him, Pete said. I know that's probably less than he's worth with his bloodlines, but I need the money quick, and injured horses are a hard sell. $25,000 for a horse worth probably 3 times that amount. Pete was sacrificing his most valuable asset to save his granddaughter, and he was still going to come up short. Marcus made his decision. I'll give you 75,000 for Thunder, he said. That's closer to what he's really worth. Pete's face went white. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate the generous offer, but I can't take charity. 25 is a fair price considering his history. It's not charity, Marcus said firmly. It's business. That horse is worth every penny of 75,000, and we both know it. You're just too desperate to ask for what he's really worth. Emma had turned to watch their conversation, her large eyes moving from one man to the other. She couldn't hear their words from where she stood, but she seemed to sense that something important was happening. I need to think about this, Pete said, but Marcus could see the hope warring with pride in his expression. Think about Emma, Marcus said quietly. Think about what she needs. As if she'd heard her name, Emma suddenly swayed on her feet. She grabbed hold of Thunder's stall door to steady herself, but her knees buckled anyway. The stallion nickered in alarm as the little girl collapsed to the barn floor. Marcus and Pete both rushed to her side. Emma was unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. Her skin was hot to the touch, and Marcus could see she was burning with fever. We need to get her to a hospital, Marcus said, scooping Emma up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a fragile bundle of bones and fevered skin. Now. Pete nodded, his face gray with fear. My truck's outside. We'll take my car, Marcus said. It's faster. They hurried from the barn toward Marcus's Mercedes, Thunder's whinny of concern following them. Emma stirred slightly in Marcus's arms, her eyes fluttering open. Mama, she whispered, the first word she'd spoken in a month. But her mother wasn't there. There was only her frightened grandfather and a stranger who had come looking for a horse but found something much more important instead. The emergency room at Hill Country Regional Medical Center erupted into controlled chaos the moment Marcus carried Emma through the automatic doors. Pete followed close behind, his weathered face etched with panic as nurses and doctors converged on the small group. She collapsed at the ranch, Marcus explained to the triage nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and capable hands. High fever, difficulty breathing, hasn't spoken in weeks. The nurse took Emma from Marcus's arms with practiced efficiency, placing her on a gurney that seemed to swallow the child's tiny frame. How long has she had the fever? I don't know, Pete said, his voice breaking. She's been quiet, staying to herself since her mother died last month. I thought she was just grieving. A young doctor appeared, his stethoscope already in hand as he began examining Emma. Her eyes had closed again, but her breathing was labored, each breath seeming to require tremendous effort. Any history of respiratory problems? The doctor asked, listening to Emma's chest. Not that I know of, Pete replied. She was always healthy before Sarah passed. Marcus stood back, feeling helpless and out of place in the sterile hospital environment. His expensive clothes and confident demeanor meant nothing here. He was just another worried adult watching medical professionals fight to help a sick child. The doctor frowned as he continued his examination. Her oxygen levels are low. We need to get her on supplemental oxygen and run some tests. Are you her legal guardian, sir? Pete nodded. Her grandfather. I have custody papers in my truck. Good, we'll need those for our records. The doctor turned to a nurse. Let's get a chest X-ray, CBC, and blood cultures, and I want to know her exact temperature. As the medical team wheeled Emma toward the treatment rooms, Marcus caught a glimpse of her pale face above the oxygen mask they'd placed over her nose and mouth. She looked even smaller and more fragile than she had in the barn, if that was possible. Mr. Henderson, a woman in scrubs approached Pete. I need to get some information for Emma's chart. Can you come with me? Pete glanced at Marcus uncertainly. Will you? I'll be right here, Marcus assured him. Go take care of the paperwork. Alone in the waiting room, Marcus found himself thinking about the events of the past few hours. He'd driven to the Henderson ranch looking for a horse that might improve his breeding program. Instead, he'd found a grieving child who might be fighting for her life, and an old man who was sacrificing everything to save her. His phone buzzed with a text message. His assistant, probably wondering why he hadn't returned her calls about tomorrow's board meeting. Marcus deleted the message without reading it. Board meeting seemed insignificant compared to what was happening in the treatment rooms down the hall. 20 minutes later, Pete returned, looking older and more tired than before. "They want to admit her," he said, sinking into a plastic chair beside Marcus. "Doctor thinks it might be pneumonia, maybe complicated by stress and grief." "That's treatable, right?" Marcus asked. "With the right medicine, yes. But she's weak, and her immune system is compromised from not eating properly. Doctor says the next 24 hours are critical." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hospital sounds around them, hushed conversations, beeping monitors, the squeak of wheels on polished floors. Finally, Pete spoke again. "I've been thinking about your offer," he said quietly. "About Thunder." Marcus turned to look at him, and... "It's too much money, more than the horse is worth, and we both know it." "I disagree," Marcus said firmly. "I think Thunder is worth exactly what I offered to pay." Pete shook his head. "You're a good man, Mr. Wellington, but I can't take charity, not even for Emma." Before Marcus could respond, the doctor appeared in the doorway of the waiting room. "Mr. Henderson, I'd like to speak with you about Emma's condition." They followed the doctor to a small consultation room where he spread Emma's chest x-rays on a light board. Even to Marcus's untrained eye, the cloudy areas in the child's lungs were clearly visible. "It's pneumonia, as we suspected," the doctor explained. "But it's more severe than I initially thought. She's also showing signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration. How long has she been refusing to eat?" Pete's face crumpled. "I don't know, she's been so quiet, so withdrawn. I thought she was eating when I wasn't watching. I should have paid closer attention." "Grief can manifest in many ways in children," the doctor said gently. "It's not uncommon for them to stop eating, stop speaking, stop engaging with the world around them. The important thing now is getting her stabilized." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. "Intravenous antibiotics for the pneumonia, IV fluids for the dehydration, and nutritional support. We'll need to keep her here for several days, maybe longer." Pete's hands were shaking as he signed the admission paperwork. Marcus could see the older man calculating costs in his head, adding up days in the hospital, medications, treatments. Even with insurance, it would be expensive. Without the medicine the child's psychiatrist had recommended, it might all be pointless anyway. "Doctor," Marcus said, "what about the psychiatric medication? I understand Emma hasn't spoken since her mother died." The doctor nodded. "Selective mutism is common in children who have experienced trauma. There are medications that can help, but they're not typically covered by insurance for children this young. The pharmaceutical companies consider them experimental for pediatric use." "But they work." "Often, yes. Combined with therapy, they can help children like Emma begin to process their grief and start communicating again. But without treatment, some children never recover. They can remain mute for years, sometimes permanently." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. The idea of Emma never speaking again, never laughing or singing or telling stories the way children should, was unbearable. "How much?" he asked. "The medication runs about $8,000 a month. Most children need it for 6 months to a year." Pete was staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched with defeat. "I don't have that kind of money," he said quietly. "Even with selling Thunder, I couldn't afford treatment that long." Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "I'll pay for it," he said. Both Pete and the doctor stared at him. "Mr. Wellington," Pete began, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. "It's not charity," Marcus said. "It's an investment in Emma's future." "I can't let you do that," Pete said, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. "You don't even know us." "I know enough," Marcus replied. "I know you're a good man who loves his granddaughter. I know Emma is a bright, beautiful child who deserves every chance to heal from this tragedy. And I know that $8,000 a month means nothing to me but everything to her." The doctor looked between them. "If you're serious about this, Mr. Wellington, I can contact the pharmacy and arrange for Emma to start treatment as soon as she's stable enough." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm serious, what do you need from me?" While the doctor made notes about the medication regimen, Pete sat in stunned silence. Finally, he looked up at Marcus with confusion and gratitude warring in his expression. Why, he asked simply, why would you do this for strangers? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. Why was he doing this? He'd spent most of his life insulated from other people's problems by wealth and privilege. He wrote checks to charities occasionally, attended fundraising galas when expected, but he'd never gotten personally involved in someone else's crisis. I don't know, he said finally, and it was the truth. I just know that when I saw Emma in that stall, something changed for me. She reminded me that there are things more important than horses or money or business deals. The doctor finished his notes and stood up. I'll get the medication ordered. In the meantime, you're welcome to visit Emma. She's in room 204. Just keep in mind that she's still very weak. They found Emma's room on the second floor, a small space with pale green walls and a window that looked out over the hospital parking lot. Emma lay in the center of a bed that seemed enormous compared to her tiny frame, oxygen tubing under her nose and IV lines running into her arm. Her eyes were closed, but Marcus could see she was breathing easier than she had been in the barn. Pete approached the bed carefully as if afraid he might wake her. Hey, baby girl, he whispered, taking her small hand in his weathered one. Grandpa's here. Emma's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her grandfather's face. When she saw Marcus standing behind him, her expression became wary again. This is Mr. Wellington, Pete said softly. He's the one who helped bring you to the hospital, and he's going to help you get better. Emma's gaze moved to Marcus, studying him with those enormous brown eyes. She looked so fragile lying there, attached to machines and monitors, but there was still something strong in her expression. A core of resilience that reminded Marcus that children were often braver than adults gave them credit for. Hi, Emma, Marcus said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. I'm glad you're feeling a little better. Emma didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Her eyes moved from Marcus to her grandfather and back again, as if she was trying to figure out what was happening. A nurse bustled in to check Emma's vital signs, chattering cheerfully as she worked. Temperature's coming down, she announced. And your oxygen levels are improving. That's good news, sweetie. Emma submitted to the examination without complaint, but Marcus noticed she tensed up whenever anyone touched her. The trauma of losing her mother had clearly made her afraid of getting close to people, as if she was protecting herself from another devastating loss. After the nurse left, Pete settled into the other chair beside Emma's bed. The horses miss you, he told her. Especially Thunder. He was looking for you after you left the barn. At the mention of Thunder, Emma's expression brightened slightly. It was the first sign of real interest Marcus had seen from her since they'd met. Thunder's a special horse, Marcus said. Your grandfather told me he likes children. That must mean he has good judgment. Emma's lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. She touched her throat with her free hand, the gesture Marcus had seen in the barn. The doctors are going to help you feel better, Pete said. There's medicine that will help you feel like talking again when you're ready. Emma looked between them, and Marcus could see questions in her eyes. She was smart enough to understand that something had changed, that decisions were being made that would affect her. But she was too young and too sick to fully grasp what was happening. Are you thirsty? Marcus asked, noticing the untouched cup of water on Emma's bedside table. Emma nodded slightly, and Marcus carefully held the straw to her lips. She took a few small sips, then lay back against her pillow with a sigh. Over the next hour, a parade of medical professionals came and went, nurses checking medication schedules, a respiratory therapist adjusting her oxygen, a social worker asking gentle questions about Emma's living situation. Through it all, Emma remained silent, watching everyone with cautious eyes. The child psychiatrist arrived just before dinner time. Dr. Sarah Chen was a small, energetic woman with a warm smile and an obviously genuine love for children. She examined Emma gently, speaking to her in soft tones and explaining everything she was doing. The good news is that selective mutism is very treatable, she told Marcus and Pete afterward. Children Emma's age often respond well to a combination of medication and play therapy. The medication we discussed will help reduce her anxiety and make it easier for her to begin communicating again. How long before we see results? Pete asked. Every child is different, Dr. Chen replied. Some start showing improvement within a few weeks. Others take longer. The important thing is patience and consistency. She'll need regular therapy sessions, and you'll need to create a safe, supportive environment at home. Marcus found himself thinking about the empty stalls in Pete's barn, the peeling paint on the farmhouse, the exhaustion in the old man's eyes. Pete was doing his best, but raising a traumatized child while running a struggling ranch was more than any one person should have to handle. What if she had additional support? Marcus asked. Someone to help with her care while Mr. Henderson manages the ranch. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. That would be ideal. Children like Emma benefit from routine and stability, but they also need specialized attention. A qualified caregiver who understands childhood trauma could make a huge difference. After Dr. Chen left, Marcus and Pete returned to Emma's room. She was awake but drowsy from the medications, her eyes heavy but still alert. When she saw them, she raised her hand slightly in what might have been a wave. "We should let you rest," Pete said, leaning down to kiss Emma's forehead. "Grandpa will be back tomorrow." As they prepared to leave, Emma made a small sound, not quite a word, but the first vocalization Marcus had heard from her. She was looking at him, her expression more curious than fearful now. "Good night, Emma," Marcus said softly. "Sweet dreams." Outside in the parking lot, Pete turned to Marcus with tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "What you're doing, it's more than generous, it's a miracle." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the gratitude. He wasn't used to being seen as anyone's miracle. "I meant what I said about Thunder," he told Pete. "$75,000 is a fair price for that horse." Pete shook his head. "You and I both know you could buy 10 horses like Thunder for that money. You're trying to help us without making it feel like charity." Marcus didn't deny it. "Maybe I am. Does it matter as long as Emma gets what she needs?" They agreed to meet the next day to complete the horse sale and discuss Emma's ongoing care. As Marcus drove back toward town, he found himself thinking about the little girl lying in that hospital bed, fighting her way back from grief and illness. He'd come to Hill Country looking for a stallion to anchor his breeding program. Instead, he'd found a child who needed saving and an old man who loved her enough to sacrifice everything for her well-being. It wasn't what he'd planned, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was doing something that actually mattered. His phone rang as he pulled into the parking lot of his hotel. His assistant again, probably frantic about the missed meetings and unanswered calls. Marcus looked at the phone for a moment, then turned it off. Tomorrow's board meeting would have to wait. He had more important things to worry about now. Back in her hospital room, Emma lay awake in the darkness, listening to the strange sounds of the medical center around her. For the first time since her mother's funeral, she didn't feel completely alone. There was her grandfather, who loved her but worried about her. And now there was the man with the kind eyes who had carried her to safety when she collapsed. She didn't understand what was happening, why this stranger was helping them. But something about Marcus Wellington made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since her mother died. Maybe, just maybe, it would be okay to trust someone new. Maybe it would even be okay to try speaking again. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself making a turn he'd never expected to make in his life, pulling into the parking lot of Hill Country Regional Medical Center for his daily visit with Emma Henderson. What had started as a business trip to buy a horse had evolved into something he couldn't quite name, but couldn't walk away from either. Emma was sitting up in bed when he arrived, color slowly returning to her pale cheeks. The oxygen tubes were gone now, replaced by normal breathing that no longer sounded like a struggle. Her brown hair had been brushed and braided by one of the nurses, and she wore a hospital gown decorated with cartoon horses that someone from the pediatric ward had brought her. "Good morning, Emma," Marcus said, settling into what had become his usual chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling today?" Emma looked at him for a long moment, her large eyes still cautious, but no longer filled with the desperate fear he'd seen that first day in the barn. Her lips moved silently, forming words that had no sound, but it was progress. Dr. Chen had explained that many children with selective mutism went through a phase of silent mouthing before they found their voices again. Pete was there too, looking more rested than he had in weeks. The burden of hospital bills and treatment costs had been lifted from his shoulders, allowing him to focus on what mattered most, helping his granddaughter heal. "Show Mr. Wellington what you drew yesterday," Pete encouraged gently. Emma reached for a sketchpad on her bedside table, her movements still careful but much stronger than they'd been 2 weeks ago. She held up a drawing done in colored pencils. a picture of a red barn with a large bay horse standing in front of it. The horse had kind eyes and a flowing black mane, and even rendered in a child's simple style, it was unmistakably Thunder. "That's beautiful," Marcus said, genuinely impressed. "You're quite an artist." Emma's face brightened slightly at the praise. She flipped to another page, showing a drawing of 3 stick figures standing in front of the same barn. One was tall and wore what looked like a cowboy hat, clearly Pete. Another was smaller, with long hair and a dress, Emma herself. The third figure was tall like Pete but wore different clothes, and Emma had taken special care with the details of his face. Marcus realized with a start that the third figure was supposed to be him. Emma had drawn him into her picture of home, including him in her small world in a way that made his chest tight with unexpected emotion. "Is that me?" he asked softly. Emma nodded, the first clear response she'd given to a direct question since he'd known her. She pointed to the drawing, then to him, then to the picture of Thunder. "You want to see Thunder again?" Marcus interpreted. Another nod, more confident this time. Emma set down the sketchpad and looked directly at him, her expression more animated than he'd seen it since that first day in the barn. Dr. Chen chose that moment to arrive for her morning session with Emma. The psychiatrist had become a regular part of their routine, working with Emma through play therapy and art while monitoring her response to the medication Marcus was funding. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Chen said cheerfully. "I see you're showing off your artwork. These drawings are wonderful." Emma pointed to the picture of the 3 figures, then looked at Dr. Chen expectantly. "You drew your family," Dr. Chen observed. "Your grandfather, yourself, and Marcus. That's very interesting, Emma. Can you tell me about this picture?" Emma's mouth opened slightly, and Marcus held his breath. For a moment, it looked like she might actually speak. Instead, she pointed to each figure in turn, then to the corresponding person in the room. "She's been more responsive this week," Dr. Chen told Marcus and Pete quietly. "The medication is definitely helping with her anxiety levels. I think she's starting to feel safe enough to consider communicating again." During the therapy session, Marcus stepped into the hallway with Pete to discuss the practical arrangements they'd been working out. Marcus had bought Thunder, as promised, paying the full $75,000 despite Pete's continued protests. But more than that, he'd been thinking about Emma's long-term care. "I've been talking to my lawyer," Marcus told Pete, "about setting up a trust fund for Emma's medical expenses, not just the psychiatric medication, but ongoing therapy, medical care, anything she might need." Pete's face showed the same mixture of gratitude and discomfort that Marcus had come to recognize. "Mr. Wellington, you've already done so much." "Marcus," he corrected, "and I haven't done enough. Emma needs stability, Pete. She needs to know that her future is secure, that she'll be taken care of no matter what happens." "What do you mean, no matter what happens?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "You're not a young man, Pete, and raising a child, especially a child who's been through what Emma has been through, is exhausting work. Have you thought about what happens if something happens to you?" Pete's face went gray. "She doesn't have anyone else. My son died in Afghanistan 10 years ago. Sarah was my only daughter if something happens to me." "She'd have the trust fund," Marcus said firmly. "Enough money to ensure she gets the best care possible, the best schools, college, whatever she needs. And I'd make sure she's placed with a family who understands her situation." "You'd do that? You'd take responsibility for her if—" "I would," Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm already invested in her well-being, Pete. I want to make sure she has every opportunity to thrive." They were interrupted by raised voices from Emma's room. Both men hurried back inside to find Dr. Chen kneeling beside Emma's bed, her face lit up with excitement. "She spoke," Dr. Chen announced. "Just one word, but she spoke." Emma was looking directly at Marcus, her eyes bright with something that might have been pride or fear or excitement. Her lips moved, and this time sound came out. "Horse," she whispered, so quietly they had to strain to hear her. The room went completely silent. Pete had tears streaming down his face. Dr. Chen was beaming. Marcus felt like his heart might stop beating entirely. "Yes," he managed to say, "horse Thunder." Emma nodded vigorously, then pointed to her drawing of the stallion. "See, Thunder," she whispered. "You want to see Thunder?" Marcus asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Emma said louder this time. "Please." It was the first complete sentence she'd spoken in over a month, and the effect on everyone in the room was electric. Pete was sobbing openly now, overcome with relief and joy. Dr. Chen was making rapid notes, documenting this breakthrough moment. Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before, a sense of purpose that went far beyond business success or financial achievement. This little girl had just trusted him with her first words in weeks, and he was determined to be worthy of that trust. "Dr. Chen," he said, "would it be appropriate for Emma to visit the ranch, to see Thunder, I mean?" Dr. Chen considered the question. Actually, that might be excellent therapy. Animal-assisted therapy can be very effective for children dealing with trauma, and if Thunder represents safety and comfort to Emma, seeing him again could reinforce her progress. They made plans for Emma to be discharged the following day, contingent on her continuing to improve. Marcus would arrange for a private ambulance to transport her to the ranch, where a visiting nurse would be on standby in case she had any setbacks. That evening, Marcus made several phone calls from his hotel room. The first was to his lawyer, instructing him to draw up the trust fund documents immediately. The second was to his personal physician, arranging for a pediatric specialist to be available for Emma's ongoing care. The third was to Pete, confirming the arrangements for the next day. The last call was the hardest one. He dialed his assistant's number and waited for her to answer. "Marcus, where have you been? You missed 3 board meetings, the Patterson deal is stalled, and your father has been calling nonstop." "Cancel everything," Marcus said simply. "Cancel what exactly?" "Everything, all meetings, all appointments, all social obligations, for the next month minimum." "Marcus, you can't just cancel everything. You have responsibilities, the company needs you." "The company will survive without me for a few weeks. This is more important." "What's more important than Wellington Industries?" Marcus looked out his hotel window toward the hospital, where Emma was probably asleep in her narrow bed, dreaming of horses and maybe, for the first time in weeks, not dreaming of death and loss. "A little girl who just said her first words in a month," he said, "and a promise I made to help her heal." He hung up before his assistant could respond. Let his father rage about missed meetings and stalled deals. Let the board wonder where he was. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus had found something that mattered more than money. The next morning, Emma was ready to leave the hospital 2 hours before the scheduled discharge time. She sat on the edge of her bed, wearing clothes Pete had brought from home, jeans and a t-shirt that were still too big but closer to her actual size than the clothes she'd worn when Marcus first found her. Her hair was brushed and pulled back in a ponytail, and there was color in her cheeks for the first time since they'd met. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked, and Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Thunder," she said clearly, and Marcus could hear the anticipation in her voice. The ride to the ranch was uneventful, Emma sitting between Marcus and Pete in the back of the medical transport vehicle. She stared out the windows with obvious excitement as familiar countryside rolled past, pointing out landmarks she recognized. "Pond," she said when they passed a small lake. "Bridge," she announced as they crossed a creek. Each word was a small miracle, proof that Emma was finding her way back to the world of the living. When they turned into the ranch driveway, Emma pressed her face to the window, searching for her first glimpse of home. The old farmhouse looked exactly the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but somehow everything felt different to Marcus now. This wasn't just the place where he'd found a sick child. This was Emma's home, the place where she would continue her healing. Thunder was waiting in his paddock, as if he knew something special was happening. When the vehicle stopped, Emma was out almost before it came to a complete halt, running toward the fence with more energy than Marcus had seen from her since that first day. "Thunder," she called out, and the stallion lifted his head, nickering a greeting that could be heard across the yard. Emma reached the fence and climbed up on the bottom rail, stretching her hand toward the horse's nose. Thunder approached carefully, his usual wariness with strangers completely absent. When Emma's small hand touched his muzzle, he stood perfectly still, as if he understood that this moment was important. "I missed you," Emma whispered to the horse, and Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. Pete joined his granddaughter at the fence, his weathered face transformed by joy. "He missed you too, baby girl. He's been looking for you every day." Marcus hung back, watching the reunion between child and horse. This was what healing looked like, he realized, not just medical treatment and therapy, but connection. love, trust, the knowledge that someone, whether human or animal, was waiting for you to come home. Dr. Chen arrived an hour later for an impromptu therapy session, bringing with her a collection of art supplies and a camera to document Emma's progress. She found Emma sitting in Thunder's paddock, the huge stallion lying down beside her while she drew pictures in a sketchbook. "This is remarkable," Dr. Chen told Marcus quietly. "I've rarely seen such a dramatic change in a patient. The bond between Emma and that horse is obviously very therapeutic." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "We continue with the medication and therapy, but I think the worst is behind us. Emma is ready to start healing now. She's found her voice again, and more importantly, she's found her trust." As the day progressed, Emma became more talkative, chattering to Thunder about everything that had happened at the hospital, introducing him to Marcus as if they were old friends meeting for the first time. "Thunder, this is Marcus," she said solemnly. "He helped me feel better. He's nice." The stallion regarded Marcus with intelligent eyes, as if taking Emma's recommendation under consideration. Then he stretched out his neck and allowed Marcus to touch his nose, a gesture of acceptance that felt more meaningful than any business deal Marcus had ever closed. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching Emma play in the yard, Pete turned to Marcus with a question that had obviously been weighing on his mind. "What happens next?" he asked. "I mean, you've got your horse, you've helped Emma get the treatment she needed. Do you just go back to your regular life now?" Marcus considered the question. He could go back to Dallas, back to board meetings and business deals and the empty luxury of his previous existence. Emma was on the road to recovery, financially secure thanks to the trust fund he'd established. His obligation was technically complete. But looking at Emma, watching her laugh as she chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, Marcus knew he couldn't just walk away. This little girl had changed something fundamental in him, awakened a capacity for love and protection he hadn't known he possessed. "I don't think I can go back," he said honestly. "I don't think I want to." Emma ran up to the porch then, slightly out of breath but glowing with happiness. "Marcus," she said, settling onto the steps beside him, "are you staying for dinner? If your grandfather doesn't mind cooking for one more." "I mean staying," Emma clarified, "like living here with us." The innocent question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, he thought. This child had seen straight to the heart of what he was feeling, but hadn't yet admitted to himself. "Would you like that?" he asked carefully. Emma nodded seriously. "Thunder likes you, and you make Grandpa happy, and you help me get better." It was the most complete explanation Marcus had ever received for any major life decision, and somehow it made more sense than any business analysis he'd ever read. Pete was watching this exchange with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You'd really consider that?" he asked. "Giving up your city life to live on a ranch in the middle of nowhere?" Marcus looked around at the rolling hills, the white-fenced pastures, the simple farmhouse with its peeling paint and wraparound porch. A month ago, this would have seemed like the least appealing place in the world. Now it felt like home. "I think I already have," he said. 3 months after Emma spoke her first words in the hospital, Marcus Wellington was learning that living on a ranch was nothing like visiting one. He stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the barn, trying to remember the proper way to mix the feed supplements Pete had explained to him the day before. His expensive business suits had been replaced by worn jeans and work boots, and his manicured hands now bore the calluses and small cuts that came from daily ranch work. "The molasses goes in first," Emma's voice came from behind him, patient and slightly amused. "Then the vitamins. Grandpa says if you put the vitamins in first, they stick to the bucket." Marcus turned to see Emma perched on a hay bale, fully dressed despite the early hour. At 8 years old, she was already proving to be a more competent ranch hand than he was. Her transformation over the past 3 months had been remarkable. The silent, withdrawn child he'd found in Thunder's stall had been replaced by a chattering, energetic girl who seemed determined to teach him everything about horses and ranch life. "I thought you were still asleep," Marcus said, adjusting the mixture according to her instructions. "I heard you get up," Emma replied. "You're really loud when you try to be quiet." Marcus laughed. It was true. His attempts at stealth in the old farmhouse were usually defeated by creaking floorboards and unfamiliar surroundings. He'd been living in Pete's guest room for 6 weeks now, officially on an extended working vacation, according to his company's board of directors. The reality was more complicated. The transition from billionaire businessman to ranch hand hadn't been smooth. Marcus's first week on the Henderson Ranch had been a disaster of epic proportions. He'd overfed the horses, causing 3 cases of mild colic. He'd left a gate unlatched, allowing the cattle to wander onto the county road. He'd tried to help with fence repairs and somehow managed to electrify himself on the wire he was supposed to be fixing. But Emma had been patient with him, in the way that children are patient with beloved but incompetent adults. She'd appointed herself his teacher and took the job seriously, correcting his mistakes with gentle encouragement and showing him the right way to do things with the confidence of someone who'd grown up around animals. "Thunder gets 3 scoops," Emma instructed as Marcus prepared the stallion's breakfast. "He's bigger than the mares, so he needs more food." Thunder had accepted Marcus's presence in his life with equine pragmatism. The stallion still preferred Emma's company, but he tolerated Marcus's inexpert attempts at grooming and care. More importantly, he seemed to understand that Marcus was important to Emma, and that was enough to earn a grudging acceptance. As they fed the horses together, Emma chattered about her plans for the day. Dr. Chen was coming for her weekly therapy session, and afterward, Emma wanted to work on training Thunder to lead properly for someone besides herself. The stallion had a tendency to ignore commands from anyone other than Emma, a problem that Marcus found both frustrating and oddly endearing. "He's testing you," Emma explained seriously as Thunder refused to move when Marcus tugged on his lead rope. "Horses do that with new people. They want to see if you really know what you're doing." "What do they do when they figure out you don't know what you're doing?" Marcus asked. "They try to train you instead," Emma giggled. "Thunder's been training you for weeks now." It was probably true. Marcus had learned more about horses in 3 months than he'd absorbed in years of owning his breeding operation. But he'd learned it the hard way, through trial and error and Emma's patient instruction. Pete emerged from the feed room carrying buckets of grain for the cattle. At 72, he moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had been shaped by decades of physical labor, but his step was lighter than it had been when Marcus first met him. The constant worry about Emma's health and future had been lifted from his shoulders, allowing him to focus on the parts of ranch life he truly loved. "Morning, city boy," Pete greeted Marcus with the affectionate nickname that had stuck despite Marcus's protests. "Ready for another lesson in how to properly embarrass yourself around livestock?" "I'm looking forward to it," Marcus replied and meant it. The work was hard and often frustrating, but it was also deeply satisfying in a way his previous life had never been. There was something honest about taking care of animals, something immediate and real that made the abstract world of finance and corporate management seem pale by comparison. Dr. Chen arrived just as they were finishing the morning chores. Emma had been making remarkable progress in her therapy sessions, but the psychiatrist continued to monitor her closely. The selective mutism was completely resolved, but Dr. Chen wanted to ensure that Emma continued to process her grief in healthy ways. "How has she been this week?" Dr. Chen asked Marcus privately while Emma showed Pete a new drawing she'd made of Thunder. "Good," Marcus said. "Talkative, happy mostly. She still has moments where she gets quiet and withdrawn, usually when something reminds her of her mother." "That's completely normal," Dr. Chen assured him. "Grief doesn't follow a timeline, especially for children. The important thing is that she's bonding with you and Pete, building new attachments that help her feel secure." Marcus glanced toward Emma, who was animatedly explaining her artwork to her grandfather. The child's capacity for joy and resilience continued to amaze him. She'd lost her mother, been seriously ill, and lived through weeks of uncertainty about her future, but she still found reasons to laugh every day. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "As a professional, I mean, is it healthy for her to be so attached to Thunder? I worry sometimes that she's using the horse to avoid dealing with human relationships." Dr. Chen considered the question. "Animal bonds can be therapeutic, but you're right to be aware of balance. In Emma's case, I think Thunder represents safety and continuity. He was here when her world fell apart, and he's still here now that it's being rebuilt. That's actually very grounding for a child who's experienced loss." During Emma's therapy session, Marcus and Pete worked on repairing fence in the south pasture. It was hard, physical work that left them both sweating despite the cool October air. Marcus had lost 15 pounds since moving to the ranch, his soft businessman's body gradually adapting to the demands of manual labor. You know, Pete said, taking a break to drink from his water bottle, when you first showed up here, I figured you'd last about a week. City folks usually do. What changed your mind? Emma, Pete said simply. The way you look at her, the way you listen when she talks, you're not just helping out with her medical bills, you genuinely care about her. Marcus set down his post-hole digger and wiped sweat from his forehead. She's an easy kid to care about. Maybe, but you didn't have to stay. You could have written a check and walked away with a clear conscience. Instead, you're here at 6 in the morning, learning how to fix fence and feed cattle like you were born to it. I'm terrible at it, Marcus protested. Now maybe, but you're getting better, and more importantly, you're not giving up. That matters to Emma, it matters to me too. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of physical labor creating its own kind of meditation. Marcus found himself thinking about the life he'd left behind in Dallas, the empty penthouse apartment, the endless meetings about quarterly projections, the social obligations that felt more like work than fun. His phone buzzed with another text from his assistant. She'd been sending increasingly frantic messages about missed opportunities and postponed decisions. His father had called twice, demanding to know when Marcus was coming back to take his responsibilities seriously. Marcus deleted the message without reading it. Whatever crisis his company was facing would have to be resolved without him. He had more important things to worry about. That afternoon, Emma demonstrated her latest training success with Thunder. She'd been working on teaching the stallion to respond to voice commands, and her progress was impressive. Thunder would walk, trot, and stop on verbal cues alone, his attention focused entirely on the little girl who'd become the center of his world. Watch this, Emma called to Marcus, positioning herself in the center of the round pen. Thunder, walk on. The stallion immediately began moving in a circle around her, his pace steady and controlled. Emma's face glowed with pride as she demonstrated the partnership she'd built with the magnificent horse. Whoa, she said quietly, and Thunder stopped immediately, turning to face her. That's incredible, Marcus said, genuinely impressed. How did you teach him that? Patience, Emma said seriously, and treats, lots of treats. As if he understood he was being discussed, Thunder walked over to the fence and pushed his nose against Marcus's hand, looking for the peppermints Marcus had started carrying in his pocket. He likes you now, Emma observed. In the beginning, he just tolerated you, but now he actually likes you. How can you tell? The way he looks at you, and he doesn't pin his ears when you come in his stall anymore. Marcus hadn't even noticed that Thunder had stopped pinning his ears back in displeasure. The observation reminded him how much Emma saw that adults missed, how carefully she watched the world around her for signs of acceptance or rejection. That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Emma made an announcement that stopped both men in their tracks. I want to change my name, she said, her voice matter-of-fact but her eyes serious. Pete and Marcus exchanged glances. What do you mean, honey? Pete asked carefully. I want my last name to be Wellington, Emma said, looking directly at Marcus. Like Marcus, so we can be a real family. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Marcus felt like his heart might burst from his chest. Pete's eyes were suspiciously bright in the porch light. Emma, Marcus said gently, that's a very big decision. Are you sure that's what you want? Yes, Emma said with the certainty that only children possessed. You take care of me, you live with us, you love me. That's what families do. Marcus knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level. I do love you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. More than I ever thought possible, but changing your name, that's something we'd need to think about very carefully. I have been thinking about it, Emma insisted. For weeks, I want to be Emma Wellington, and I want you to adopt me like real fathers do. The word father hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been thinking of himself as Emma's guardian, her protector, her friend. But she was right. Somewhere along the way, without him fully realizing it, he'd become her father in every way that mattered. What about your grandfather? Marcus asked, glancing at Pete. This is his family too. Emma considered this seriously. Grandpa Pete will always be my grandpa, but you're my daddy now, I decided. Pete stood up abruptly and walked to the edge of the porch, his shoulders shaking. When he turned back, tears were streaming down his weathered face. She's right, he said simply. You are her father now in every way that counts. Marcus felt his own tears threatening. Emma, if that's what you really want, then yes, I want to adopt you. I want to be your father officially. Emma launched herself into his arms with enough force to knock him backward. I knew you'd say yes, she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. Thunder told me you would. Thunder told you? Not with words, Emma explained patiently. But horses know things. He knows you love me because you love him too, and he knows you're staying forever because you're not scared of him anymore. Marcus held Emma tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the faint smell of horses that always seemed to cling to her clothes. This little girl had saved him just as much as he'd saved her, had given his life meaning and purpose that all his money had never provided. Forever, he promised. I'm staying forever. As they sat together on the porch swing, Emma curled up between Marcus and Pete. Marcus thought about the phone calls he'd need to make. His lawyer would handle the adoption paperwork. His father would eventually understand that some things were more important than quarterly profits. His assistant would adjust to having a boss who put family first. Thunder whinnied from his pasture and Emma giggled. He's saying good night, she translated. He's happy we're all together. Looking up at the star-filled sky that stretched endlessly over the Texas hill country, Marcus had to agree. For the first time in his adult life, he was exactly where he belonged. 1 year after Marcus Wellington first drove down that dusty road looking for a horse, he stood in the same barn where he'd found Emma, but everything had changed. The old building had been restored with careful attention to maintaining its character while adding modern conveniences, better lighting, improved ventilation, and state-of-the-art safety features. The stalls were full now, housing not just Thunder and the original mares, but a carefully selected group of quarter horses that formed the foundation of what was becoming one of Texas's most respected breeding operations. But the most dramatic change wasn't in the barn itself. It was in the 9-year-old girl who came running through the doors, her long brown hair flying behind her as she called out excitedly. Dad, Dad, come see what Thunder did. Emma Wellington, her adoption had been finalized 6 months ago, was everything a child should be. Healthy, happy, confident, and secure in the love of her family. The silent, withdrawn girl Marcus had found curled up in a horse stall was now a chattering, energetic force of nature who seemed to fill every space she entered with light and laughter. What has Thunder done now? Marcus asked, setting down the feed bucket he'd been filling. After a year of ranch life, the morning chores had become second nature to him. His soft businessman's hands were permanently calloused now, and his expensive watch had been replaced by a practical work watch that could withstand the daily reality of ranch work. He opened the gate to the north pasture all by himself, Emma announced, breathless with excitement. I watched him do it. He figured out how to lift the latch with his nose. Marcus groaned. Thunder's intelligence had been both a blessing and a curse over the past year. The stallion had proven to be not only an exceptional breeding horse, but also an escape artist of the highest order. He'd learned to open stall doors, untie lead ropes, and apparently now operate gate latches. We'll have to upgrade the hardware again, Marcus muttered, making a mental note to call the fence company. But Dad, don't you think it's cool that he's so smart? Emma asked, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the house for breakfast. Cool, yes. Convenient, no, Marcus replied, but he was smiling. Emma's enthusiasm for everything related to horses was infectious, and her bond with Thunder had only grown stronger over the year. The farmhouse they approached had been transformed as well. The peeling paint had been replaced with fresh white siding, the wraparound porch had been rebuilt and expanded, and the interior had been modernized while maintaining its country charm. It was still recognizably the same house where Pete Henderson had raised his children, but now it reflected the love and investment of a family committed to making it their permanent home. Pete was in the kitchen making breakfast, moving more slowly than he had a year ago, but still insisting on doing his share of the work. At 73, he'd officially handed over most of the ranch operations to Marcus, but he remained an invaluable source of knowledge and experience. More importantly, he'd become the grandfather Emma needed, patient, loving, and always ready with a story or a gentle word of advice. Morning, trouble, Pete greeted Emma as she burst through the kitchen door. I heard about Thunder's latest adventure from here. He woke up half the county with his victory whinny. He was proud of himself, Emma defended her beloved horse. You should have seen how he pranced around after he got the gate open, like he was saying, look what I did. Marcus poured coffee for himself and Pete while Emma chattered about her plans for the day. School didn't start for another hour, but Emma was always up early to help with the horses. She'd insisted on taking responsibility for Thunder's daily care, and Marcus had been amazed by how seriously she took the job. "Don't forget you have your riding lesson with Mrs. Patterson this afternoon," Pete reminded her as she wolfed down her breakfast. Emma made a face. "I wish I could just ride Thunder instead of boring old lesson horses." "Thunder is too big and too spirited for riding lessons," Marcus said firmly. "When you're older and more experienced, we'll talk about it." It was an ongoing debate in their household. Emma was convinced she was ready to ride Thunder, while the adults were equally convinced she wasn't. At 9 years old, Emma was an accomplished rider for her age, but Thunder was a powerful stallion who required an experienced horseman. As they finished breakfast, Marcus's phone rang. Dr. Chen called every few weeks to check on Emma's continued progress, and her calls had become a welcome reminder of how far they'd all come. "How is she doing?" Dr. Chen asked after Marcus stepped onto the porch to take the call privately. "Wonderful," Marcus said, watching through the window as Emma helped Pete pack her school lunch. "Sometimes I forget she was ever the silent, frightened child I found in that stall." "That's actually a good sign," Dr. Chen replied. "It means her trauma has been integrated into her story rather than defining her entire identity. She's found security and stability, which has allowed her personality to flourish." "What about the nightmares?" Marcus asked. Emma still occasionally woke up crying from dreams about her mother, though they were much less frequent than they'd been in the early months. "Those may continue for a while," Dr. Chen said gently. "Grief doesn't have an expiration date, especially for children. But as long as she has your support and continues to feel secure, she'll keep processing her loss in healthy ways." After ending the call, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The legal adoption had been surprisingly straightforward. Emma had no other living relatives besides Pete, and her obvious happiness in her new life had convinced the family court judge that the arrangement was in her best interests. More complicated had been untangling Marcus from his previous life. Wellington Industries was still his company, but he'd restructured it to allow him to work remotely most of the time. Board meetings were conducted via video conference from his home office, and he traveled to Dallas only when absolutely necessary. His father had been apoplectic about the arrangement initially, unable to understand why Marcus would give up the luxury and prestige of city life for what he called playing house with strangers in the middle of nowhere. But even Robert Wellington's disapproval had softened when he met Emma for the first time. Emma had won over her intimidating grandfather with the same unconscious charm she used on everyone else. Within an hour of meeting her, Robert Wellington was sitting on the porch listening to stories about Thunder, while Emma braided flowers into his expensive tie. By the end of that first visit, he was planning to fund the construction of a new indoor riding arena on the ranch. The school bus arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, and Emma gave Marcus and Pete each a quick hug before racing down the driveway with her backpack bouncing behind her. Marcus watched until the bus disappeared around the bend, a habit he'd developed over the months of being a father. "She's growing up fast," Pete observed, joining Marcus on the porch. "Too fast," Marcus agreed. It seemed like yesterday that Emma had been the tiny, fragile child in the hospital bed. Now she was tall for her age, strong and confident with the kin.